Imagine you did everything right. You studied hard. You got the degree. You showed up early, stayed late, never complained, hit your targets, earned your reviews, got your raises. You did exactly what you were told a successful person was supposed to do. And then one day, somewhere around your late 30s or mid-40s, you do the math. You add up your income over the past decade. Maybe it's $1 million. Maybe it's more. And then you look at your net worth, your savings, your investments, what you actually own. And the number staring back at you doesn't make any sense. It's a fraction of what passed through your hands, sometimes a very small fraction. You didn't waste it. You weren't irresponsible. You just followed the plan. That's the part nobody warned you about. The plan was never designed to make you wealthy. It was designed to make you useful. And those are two very different things. Let's talk about the story we all grew up inside. It goes something like this. Work hard, be loyal, climb the ladder, and financial security will follow. This is the foundational promise of the modern employment contract, not written down anywhere, not legally binding, just deeply culturally assumed. And for roughly 30 years after World War II, it more or less worked. Companies offered pensions, health care was covered. You stayed at one place for decades, they took care of you, and when you retired, you got a check every month until you died. The deal was real, then, quietly, it wasn't. Starting in the late 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s, corporations began shifting the risk. Pensions became 401ks. Lifetime employment became at will. Loyalty became a one-way street that employees kept walking down while companies quietly turned the other direction. By the 1990s, the new religion of shareholder value had taken hold. Companies weren't institutions anymore. They were portfolios. Employees weren't assets. They were costs. And costs, as any good CFO will tell you, are meant to be managed down. But here's the strange part. Nobody told the employees. The cultural script stayed exactly the same. Be a good employee, work hard, show loyalty. The language didn't change. The advice didn't change. Your parents still gave you the same speech. Your guidance counselor still pointed you toward the same path. The entire cultural operating system kept running on software that the actual economy had already abandoned. And an entire generation, actually several generations, built their financial lives around a promise that had already been quietly broken. Now let's get into the actual math, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. The average American worker earns somewhere around $60,000 a year. Over a 40-year career, that's $2.4 million in gross income. Even accounting for taxes, you're moving well over $1 million through your hands in a lifetime of work. The median retirement savings for Americans between 55 and 64, the people who are about to retire, is roughly $134,000. The mean is higher, around $537,000, but the mean is pulled up by a small number of very wealthy people. For most people, the realistic number is somewhere in the low hundreds of thousands. You earned millions. You kept thousands. Where did it go? Not to bad decisions necessarily, to the system working exactly as designed. Think about what happens to $1 you earn as an employee. First, income tax takes its share. Federal, state, sometimes local. Then payroll taxes. Then you spend what's left and you pay sales tax. You pay rent or a mortgage, and if it's rent, that money is gone. If it's a mortgage, a huge portion of your early payments is interest, money that goes directly to the bank and builds no equity at all. You pay for a car, which depreciates. You pay for insurance, utilities, childcare, groceries, subscriptions. By the time that dollar has run its course, the actual wealth-building slice of it, the portion that ends up in an asset that compounds, is remarkably thin. And the system is not neutral about this. It is actively structured to consume the earnings of people who trade time for money and to accumulate wealth in the hands of people who own things. Here's the core mechanic that most people never quite see clearly enough. There are two ways to make money in a capitalist economy. You can sell your time, or you can own something that earns while you sleep. The first is called labor income. The second is called capital income. The entire tax code, in the United States and in most Western countries, treats these two things very differently. Labor income is taxed at your marginal rate, which can be 22, 24, 32, even 37%. Capital gains, money made from selling assets you own, is taxed at a maximum of 20% federally, and often much less. Dividends from stocks can be taxed at 0% if you structure things right. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve's monetary policy for the past 15 years has, regardless of intent, driven up asset prices dramatically. Real estate, stocks, private equity, the assets that wealthy people own have increased in value at rates that dwarf wage growth. Between 2010 and 2020, the S&P 500 returned roughly 250%. Real wages for median workers grew about 9% over the same period. If you owned assets, you got richer in your sleep. If you sold your time, you mostly kept pace with inflation. The good employee was, in the most literal financial sense, playing the wrong game. Not because they were foolish, because nobody clearly explained that there were two different games happening simultaneously, and they had only been given the rules to one of them. But wait, there's another layer to this. Being a really good employee, the kind who rises, who gets promoted, who earns well above average, doesn't necessarily change the equation. It can actually make certain parts of it worse. Here's why. Higher income pushes you into higher tax brackets. It also tends to expand your lifestyle. There's a term economists use, lifestyle inflation. The more you earn, the more your spending tends to rise to meet it. Better apartment, better car, better vacations, private school. The subtle social pressures of earning more are relentless, and they're invisible because they don't feel like pressure. They feel like reward. Meanwhile, the hours you pour into being excellent at your job are hours you are not spending learning to invest, building alternative income streams, developing assets, or doing the slow, unglamorous work of building something you own. The career ladder and the wealth ladder are not the same ladder. And this is the real bite of the lie. Because being a good employee doesn't just fail to build wealth. In some cases, it actively crowds out the thinking and time and energy it would take to build it. You're so busy being excellent at the thing that benefits your employer that you have almost nothing left for the thing that would benefit you. None of this is cynical, exactly. It's not a conspiracy. Companies are not sitting in rooms plotting to keep their workers poor. The system is simply optimized for what systems get optimized for. Its own continuation and the interests of the people with the most power within it. And to be fair, employment does provide real things. Stability, health insurance, a paycheck that arrives regardless of market conditions. For people with families, with mortgages, with limited capital to risk, the employed path is not irrational. It's often the only realistic option. But there is a difference between choosing it clearly, with eyes open, knowing what it does and doesn't do for your long-term wealth, and choosing it because you were told it was the path to financial security, which is a different claim entirely, and one that the data does not support. So, what do people who actually accumulate wealth do differently? The answer isn't dramatic. It's not crypto or day trading or some secret your financial advisor doesn't want you to know. It's something much more structural. People who build significant wealth almost always own something. Equity in a business, real estate, index funds held over decades, intellectual property, something. They are not purely dependent on their labor income. They have at least one stream of income that doesn't require them to show up. And they start this early, not because of some superhuman discipline, but because compounding is grotesquely time-dependent. $1 invested at 25 is worth roughly 4 times as much at 65 as $1 invested at 40, assuming average market returns. That's not motivation poster math. That's just how exponential curves work. The typical good employee delays this. They spend their 20s optimizing for career advancement, their 30s expanding their lifestyle, their 40s starting to worry about retirement, their 50s trying to catch up. And at some point, the math becomes genuinely hard to fix, not because it's impossible, but because the most powerful years, the ones where time does the most work, are already gone. Here is the uncomfortable thought that sits underneath all of this. The traits that make you a good employee and the traits that build long-term wealth are not identical. In fact, they sometimes point in opposite directions. A good employee optimizes for approval. A wealth builder optimizes for ownership. A good employee defers to the hierarchy. A wealth builder makes decisions independently. A good employee is loyal to the institution. A wealth builder is loyal to the asset. A good employee thinks in quarters and annual reviews. A wealth builder thinks in decades. These are not minor stylistic differences. They are different mental operating systems. And the one most employers actively select for, reward, and reinforce every single day is not the one that leads to financial independence. Which means that the more you succeed at the game of being a good employee, the more you may be conditioning yourself against the habits of mind that the other game requires. None of this means quit your job tomorrow. None of it means employment is a trap and entrepreneurship is salvation. Plenty of entrepreneurs go broke. Plenty of employees retire wealthy. The world is full of exceptions, but the exceptions tend to share something in common. They understood at some point that the employment contract is an exchange, your time and skill for a wage, and that it was never anywhere in the fine print a promise of wealth. They stopped outsourcing their financial future to an employer's goodwill and started building something parallel, something that belonged to them. They stopped trying to win the good employee game and started playing a second game alongside it. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. We spend enormous energy teaching young people how to be excellent employees. We build educational systems around it. We grade them on it. We reward the behaviors, compliance, performance, showing up, that make them valuable to someone else. We spend almost no time teaching them how to own things, how capital works, how to read a balance sheet or understand an equity stake or think about the difference between an asset and an expense. These are not complex ideas. They're just not taught, not consistently, not early, not in the places where most people are shaped. And so generation after generation of reasonably intelligent, hardworking people arrive at the end of their earning years with the uncomfortable math in front of them. Millions earned, a fraction kept, and a quiet, unsettling question beginning to form. What exactly was all that work for? I don't have a clean answer, but I think the question itself is worth sitting with. Because if you're still in the middle of your earning years, if the math is still workable, if time is still on your side, the moment you really ask it is the moment the story can change. The question is whether anyone taught you to ask it early enough.